The Colorado courthouse was bustling with an almost electric tension that morning, a mixture of curiosity, anticipation, and nerves that hovered like a charged cloud over every seat in the crowded room. Reporters from local stations sat huddled in the corner with notebooks poised, while families of victims shifted uneasily in the wooden pews, clutching tissues and each other's hands. A serious case was underway, one that had gripped the community for months. A man accused of a violent home invasion that had left a family shaken and a neighborhood on edge. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney named Karen Morales, had prepared meticulously, rehearsing every line and piece of evidence she intended to present. She had the crime scene photos, the fingerprints, the stolen items, and most importantly, the testimony of the police K-9 officer who had tracked the suspect through a tangle of backyards and alleyways. On the other side of the courtroom, the defense attorney, a sharp, calculating man named Daniel Harris, sat quietly reviewing his notes. He knew the stakes were high. His client, a man in his 30s with a history of minor offenses but nothing violent, faced serious jail time if convicted. Harris leaned back, exhaling slowly, attempting to maintain the calm exterior that the jury expected from a competent defender. Yet even he felt a twinge of anxiety. There was something about this case that went beyond the normal courtroom strategies. It was the kind of case where one small misstep could tip the scales entirely. At the very back of the courtroom, almost unnoticed at first, sat a little girl in bright pink sneakers, clutching her aunt's hand tightly. She was only 3 years old, too young to understand much of what was happening, or so her aunt thought. She had been brought along out of necessity. Childcare had fallen through that morning, and the courthouse allowed visitors in the gallery. At first, the girl had been content to wiggle in her seat, staring at the polished wooden floors, watching the shuffle of papers and the tapping of pens. She barely noticed the adults around her or the hushed murmur of anxious whispers filling the room. But there was one thing she did notice, one presence that stood out sharply amid the sterile courtroom environment: the police dog. Ranger, a retired German shepherd with a calm, authoritative presence, sat obediently beside his handler near the front of the courtroom. His fur was speckled with gray from age, his eyes steady and intelligent. He had once been a star K-9 officer, celebrated for his tracking abilities, but after a serious injury during a chase, he had been reassigned to more routine duties. Today, he was simply a part of the court, meant to accompany the officer and remain calm during testimony. Few people really knew his history, and even fewer were aware that his connection to this case ran deeper than anyone could imagine. The proceedings began as expected. Judge Allen, a man known for his patience but also his firm control of the courtroom, called the session to order. Witnesses were sworn in, attorneys rose and presented their opening statements, and the rhythm of the trial settled into the predictable cadence of procedural justice. The defendant remained quiet, occasionally whispering to Harris, while the jury leaned forward attentively, taking in every word. Morales detailed the home invasion with precise, calculated emotion, emphasizing the terror experienced by the family and the evidence pointing toward the defendant. Meanwhile, the little girl sat quietly, but her eyes were not wandering randomly. She had recognized something familiar in Ranger the moment she had stepped into the room. Her tiny fingers twitched as if urging her to do something more than just watch. She remembered a night, months ago, filled with flashing lights and loud sirens. She remembered officers running through her backyard, the sound of broken glass under hurried boots, and the feeling of fear pressing against her chest. And she remembered Ranger, then not as a calm courtroom presence, but as a protector, a gentle shadow who had nudged her behind a tree, shielding her from danger. That memory, vivid and clear in her young mind, now pressed insistently at the front of her consciousness. As the trial progressed, she began to fidget in her seat, her attention entirely on Ranger. The adults around her were absorbed in the legal arguments, unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen. The air in the courtroom shifted subtly, as if anticipating the disruption that would soon unfold. The judge was explaining the procedures for witness testimony when the girl's breathing grew more noticeable. Her hand lifted slowly, trembling with both recognition and urgency. Then she pointed, a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of memory and truth far beyond her years. "There," she whispered, her voice barely audible but piercingly clear in the hushed courtroom. All eyes instinctively followed her finger to the K-9 officer standing near the front. The judge froze mid-sentence. The jury leaned forward, sensing the sudden shift in focus. The defense attorney straightened, confused, while the prosecutor blinked, taken aback. Even the defendant paused, shifting uneasily in his chair. The room held its collective breath as the tiny girl, trembling but resolute, took a hesitant step forward. Her aunt attempted to catch her hand, murmuring for her to sit, but the girl gently pulled free, guided by something deeper than fear or hesitation. She knew, instinctively, that this moment was important. Ranger's ears twitched, his eyes locking onto her small frame with a recognition that mirrored her own. The handler remained still, sensing that the dog's calm demeanor was about to be interrupted by an extraordinary event. Finally she spoke, 2 words whispered softly but carried with a clarity that seemed impossible from such a small voice. "Good helper." The courtroom went silent. The sound of her voice seemed to echo off the walls, louder than any testimony that had come before. Every adult froze, unsure how to respond to the weight of those words. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. The prosecutor's pen hovered over her notes, her mouth slightly open. The defense attorney's brow furrowed, realizing instinctively that this was no ordinary interruption. And Ranger, for his part, let out a soft exhale, as if acknowledging the truth in her recognition. It was a moment that seemed suspended in time. Everyone in the courtroom, from the jurors to the reporters, understood that something profound had occurred, though none could yet articulate what it meant. 2 words from a 3-year-old had altered the energy of the entire room, introducing an element of truth that no adult had anticipated. The tiny girl had become an unwitting witness, one whose memory and courage could change the course of the trial. Her aunt finally caught up to her, gently guiding her back toward the pew, whispering apologies and reassurances. But the girl's eyes remained locked on Ranger, and her fingers lingered in the air, as if reluctant to let go of the connection she had made. The K-9's calm posture betrayed none of the emotion he clearly felt, but the subtle flick of his tail, the alertness in his eyes, spoke volumes. He had recognized her, just as she had recognized him, and in that silent exchange, the courtroom collectively sensed the importance of what had just unfolded. Judge Allen cleared his throat, regaining control of the room, but even he spoke with a newfound awareness. "We will take a brief recess," he said, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. Attorneys, jurors, and officers alike understood that this was no ordinary recess. Something about the girl's words, her pointed finger, and Ranger's reaction demanded attention. Questions would need answers, and the trial's course might very well pivot on the clarity offered by the smallest participant in the room. Outside the courtroom, whispers began to circulate. Reporters jotted down notes frantically. Families of the victims exchanged astonished glances. The defendant shifted in his chair, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. And through it all, the little girl remained at the center of an unfolding moment no one had predicted, her small voice now holding the power to change the path of justice. It was the beginning of a day that would be remembered long after the trial ended, a day when a 3-year-old, a retired police dog, and 2 simple words collided to stop a courtroom cold, leaving everyone present both astonished and profoundly aware that truth sometimes arrives in the most unexpected forms. The courthouse buzzed with quiet murmurs as the trial continued after the brief, unexpected pause. The judge had called a recess, ostensibly to allow the courtroom to regain order, but whispers circulated like wildfire. Every adult present tried to mask their curiosity, but all eyes kept darting toward the little girl and Ranger. Her 2 words, "Good helper," had shifted the entire atmosphere. What had been a routine home invasion trial, procedural and predictable, now carried the undercurrent of extraordinary uncertainty. Lawyers shifted papers nervously, reporters rechecked their notes, and jurors exchanged furtive glances, wondering what could possibly come next. The prosecutor, Corinne Morales, was a seasoned professional, known for her meticulous preparation and ability to stay composed under pressure. She adjusted her glasses and leaned back in her chair, briefly exhaling as she thought through her next move. The case had seemed straightforward. The defendant had been caught on surveillance near the scene, his fingerprints were found on a broken window, and stolen items were recovered from a nearby alley. The K-9 officer, Ranger, had provided a detailed report tracing the suspect's path through backyards and fences. That report had been solid, technically flawless. But the girl's sudden recognition of Ranger introduced a factor no one had accounted for, a witness the defense had not seen coming. The defendant, a man named Thomas Grayson, had been quiet for most of the trial. He had a defensive demeanor, shifting nervously in his seat whenever the prosecution spoke. He seemed calm, almost unnervingly so, but the sudden intervention by a 3-year-old unsettled him. Daniel Harris, his defense attorney, whispered in his ear, cautioning him not to react, to remain composed. Grayson's eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of fear. He had known about the K-9's involvement during the break-in, but he had never imagined that a child could remember the events so vividly, and could potentially influence the jury with her recognition. Meanwhile, the jury sat forward in their seats, curiosity mingled with disbelief. Some exchanged subtle glances, unsure if they had heard correctly, while others leaned closer, trying to catch even the faintest detail of the toddler's words. They had come expecting a standard presentation of facts, testimony, evidence, and cross-examination. Instead, they had witnessed something unusual, something that hinted at a deeper layer of truth hidden in plain sight. The room's energy shifted subtly. Adults became more alert, more attentive, aware that this trial might unfold differently than anyone had predicted. Outside the courtroom, the night of the home invasion had long been a source of anxiety for the neighborhood. The Grayson case had drawn attention precisely because it was both terrifying and unresolved in the minds of many residents. Reports of a man entering a home while the family slept had sparked fear and outrage, but much of the evidence had relied on standard investigative procedures. Witnesses were scarce, and the neighborhood had largely relied on the K-9's tracking report to piece together what happened. Until today, no one had considered that a toddler, hiding quietly that night, might provide first-hand insight into the events. The little girl, still sitting on her aunt's lap, seemed momentarily unaware of the magnitude of her actions. To her, it was instinctual. She remembered the fear, the chaos, and the comfort Ranger had provided. Her memory was sharp, vivid, and unusually detailed for someone so young. The Aunt Jennifer now felt a mix of awe and concern. She had known her niece was bright and perceptive, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She leaned down, whispering softly, trying to calm her without diminishing the girl's courage. The prosecution began to adjust their approach. Morales realized that the girl's recognition of Ranger could serve as corroboration for the K-9 officer's testimony. Ranger's presence alone had been strong evidence of the suspect's path, but now, combined with the child's memory, the timeline of the crime could be established with unprecedented clarity. Morales quickly conferred with officers outside the courtroom, reviewing their notes and footage, and they realized that there were minor details from that night which had never been formally presented. These details, aligned with the toddler's recollections, could strengthen the case immeasurably. Detectives revisited the archived body cam footage from the night of the break-in. They noted Ranger's behavior, how he had momentarily broken formation, veered toward a shadowy corner, and returned shortly after, calm but alert. At the time, this deviation had been logged but never highlighted. The footage now held new significance. It corroborated the possibility that someone had been hiding in that spot, someone the dog had instinctively protected. And as the adults reviewed the video, they realized the small child had described the exact location, movements, and interactions that matched Ranger's actions. The defense was quick to sense a shift in momentum. Harris studied the prosecutor carefully, realizing that she now had a potentially unshakable witness, one whose innocence and clarity could sway the jury in ways that standard testimony might not. He whispered to Grayson, trying to keep his client calm, but he too understood the implications. A 3-year-old could not fabricate detailed memory of the night. If questioned, her account could directly challenge the suspect's alibi. This was a twist no one had anticipated, and it suddenly made what seemed like a routine case anything but ordinary. As the recess ended, Judge Allen called the courtroom back to order. The gallery was unusually attentive, the spectators aware that something remarkable was unfolding. The jurors settled into their seats, eyes fixed on the little girl, now perched nervously on her aunt's lap. The judge's gavel struck lightly, restoring formal procedure but unable to erase the tension that lingered. Every attorney knew that the next few hours would be critical. The case that had been expected to follow a predictable course was now poised to pivot, driven by the insight of the smallest witness in the room. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of disbelief, anticipation, and cautious hope. Reporters whispered among themselves, scribbling down every observed expression, while the public gallery leaned forward, watching the courtroom drama unfold in real time. Every movement, every glance between the girl and Ranger seemed laden with meaning. Adults speculated about what the child might reveal, and even Grayson's composure began to crack subtly under the scrutiny. No one could predict the precise impact, but everyone sensed that the course of justice might soon take an unexpected turn. As proceedings resumed, Morales carefully approached the child's presence in the courtroom. She didn't want to disrupt or frighten the toddler, but she recognized the potential importance of what the girl might contribute. She spoke quietly with the handler, confirming details about Ranger's behavior and history, and began formulating a strategy to incorporate this unusual witness without undermining the gravity of the trial. Every decision mattered, because the courtroom had shifted from a procedural environment to a stage where memory, instinct, and truth intersected in unpredictable ways. Throughout it all, the little girl remained composed in her own small way. She had witnessed chaos before and understood in her childlike clarity that Ranger was there to protect her. Her memory, vivid and precise, was waiting for the moment to be acknowledged. And in the courtroom, with every adult holding their breath, it became clear that her recognition of the dog was not just a fleeting coincidence. It was the first ripple in a series of revelations that would upend expectations, reveal hidden truths, and demonstrate that even the smallest witnesses could hold immense power over justice. By the time the jury returned their attention fully to the case, it was evident that this trial was no longer ordinary. Every person in the room, from lawyers to spectators, recognized the unspoken reality. The night of the home invasion had a new perspective, one that had been overlooked for months. And the source of that perspective was a 3-year-old girl whose 2 words, uttered quietly, confidently, had already begun to shift the course of justice in ways no one could have predicted. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the courtroom was poised for revelations that would resonate far beyond that day. Ranger, the retired German shepherd, sat with his usual calm precision beside his handler, Officer Mark Reynolds. At first glance, he seemed just another presence in the courtroom, an orderly observer of proceedings. Yet anyone attuned to animals, especially K-9 officers, would have recognized the subtle tension in his posture, the alertness in his ears, the tracking gaze that occasionally flicked toward the toddler. Ranger remembered, not in the fragmented, forgetful way older dogs sometimes did, but in a sharp, precise memory stamped by instinct and training. That dog had been present the night of the break-in, guiding, protecting, and observing details no human had fully noticed. Months prior, Ranger had been dispatched to the Grayson home, a routine-looking call that had quickly escalated into chaos. The officers had been in a rush to reach the scene, sirens slicing through the quiet night. The neighborhood's darkness became a labyrinth of shadows, fences, and narrow pathways. Ranger had maneuvered with agility, cutting corners and alerting his handler when something was out of place. He had been trained to detect movement, sense, and changes in behavior, skills that had saved lives countless times. But that night, something unusual had occurred. In the middle of the chase, Ranger had paused. He veered off the main path toward a corner of the yard near a cluster of trees. There he nudged something, or rather someone, gently with his nose, a small hand trembling barely visible in the shadows. The handler, preoccupied with the suspect, hadn't immediately noticed. Ranger stayed just long enough to ensure the child was safe, guiding her quietly behind a tree and only then returning to the pursuit. The break-in formation had been documented in notes, but no one had emphasized it in court. To the adults reading the report, it had seemed like a minor deviation. To Ranger, it was everything. Now, months later, Ranger's eyes fixed on the same child seated in the courtroom. Something flickered in his gaze, a spark of recognition that those who had never worked with K-9 officers might have missed. His body stiffened just slightly, tail flicking almost imperceptibly, and he tilted his head. The child's pink sneakers, the small hand clutching her aunt, even the nervous breathing, all signals to Ranger that she was the same presence from that night. His instincts told him to protect, to acknowledge, to ensure that this child's truth was seen. And the courtroom, unaware of the depth of his memory, held its collective breath. The handler, Officer Reynolds, felt the shift as well. He knew Ranger's behavior had changed subtly, enough to make him lean forward and watch carefully. "Easy, boy," he murmured quietly, speaking in the low, steady tone reserved for moments of intense focus, but Ranger barely moved. His attention was fixed entirely on the child, scanning her, recognizing her, and perhaps sensing the importance of what she might reveal. Reynolds understood that this was no ordinary courtroom moment. The dog was communicating, silently, with everyone present, and his behavior was a signal of imminent revelation. The child, for her part, had already sensed the connection. She had vivid memories of that night, the flashing red and blue lights, the sound of sirens echoing through her small backyard, the shadowy figure running across the lawn. Most of all, she remembered the dog, not as a trained animal performing a task, but as a guardian, a gentle guide who had nudged her to safety when chaos reigned. Now, sitting in the courthouse, all the memory came rushing back, crystallized with clarity. Her finger pointed, her eyes widened, and her voice, small but firm, whispered, "Good helper." Every adult present felt the shift in energy. The judge paused mid-instruction, the gavel frozen in his hand. Jurors leaned forward, instinctively aware that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing the moment before it passed, trying to understand the gravity of the child's recognition. The defendant, Thomas Grayson, shifted in his seat, a subtle wave of unease washing over his previously composed demeanor. His mind raced. How could this tiny human, barely 3 years old, have observed and remembered a detail that could unravel his alibi? The prosecutors were quick to adjust. Karen Morales conferred quietly with the officers, reviewing the archived K-9 notes and bodycam footage from that night. The deviation in Ranger's pursuit suddenly became central evidence. What had been dismissed as minor documentation now held profound significance. The dog had paused, deviated from the path, and interacted with a hidden child, something previously unacknowledged, untested, and unseen by anyone except Ranger, and, apparently, the child herself. Morales realized that the little girl could serve as a living witness, providing context, detail, and human clarity to the actions of the K-9 officer that night. Harris, the defense attorney, grew uneasy. The unpredictable variable had arrived. This was a witness who could not be coached, threatened, or swayed. Her account was pure, derived from memory and experience, and when she spoke, it would carry weight. He whispered to Grayson, trying to maintain composure, but the panic in his client's eyes was evident. The very foundation of the defense, reliance on procedural gaps and limited eyewitness testimony, was suddenly threatened by the smallest presence in the room. Outside the courtroom, the events of that night loomed large in memory. The neighborhood had long debated the details. Officers had moved through the area quickly, chasing the suspect, responding to frantic calls and documenting what they could. Residents had been unaware that a child had witnessed the events firsthand. Until now, no one had considered that the toddler, observing from behind a tree, might have retained precise details that matched Ranger's deviation and behavior. The courtroom now held a living bridge between that hidden memory and the evidence presented formally. The atmosphere grew electric. Adults were aware that the trial's trajectory was no longer predictable. The jury watched with heightened attention, sensing that truth had appeared in a form they had not anticipated. Every movement, every glance between Ranger and the child seemed to carry hidden significance. Officers, lawyers, and spectators all felt it, a recognition that the child's observation could become pivotal, altering the case in ways no legal strategy alone could achieve. Judge Allen, a man known for measured patience, observed the developing scene carefully. He understood the gravity without yet knowing the specifics. The two words uttered by the child, "good helper," had transformed the courtroom's energy. Something profound was about to unfold. The judge leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, his gavel poised. Every adult knew that the next moments could pivot the case entirely, shifting the focus from purely procedural evidence to a combination of instinct, memory, and observation. Meanwhile, the child's aunt, Jennifer, realized the magnitude of the moment. She had not anticipated her niece's role in the unfolding trial. Her heart raced with a mixture of pride, fear, and awe. She gently cupped the child's hand, whispering soothing words, though she could feel that the girl's awareness was already far beyond what most would expect of a 3-year-old. This was no simple distraction. This was a moment of truth, and the child was at the center, poised to reveal insights that adults had overlooked. The courtroom held its collective breath as the little girl's gaze remained locked on Ranger. She remembered the precise details, the sequence of events, the direction the suspect ran, the position of broken objects, the quiet nudges of the K-9 that had guided her. She had witnessed more than any adult realized, and now, instinctively, she had positioned herself to convey it. Her memory, unfiltered and precise, became a silent instrument capable of reshaping the case in ways no legal argument could. Officer Reynolds adjusted his stance, quietly communicating with Morales that Ranger's reaction was authentic. The dog's calm, alert recognition confirmed what the child had expressed. The events of that night were being remembered accurately and could now be tied directly to both human and canine witnesses. This validation was crucial. In court, evidence often relied on documentation, photographs, and testimony. Here, instinct and memory converged to reveal a truth that had never been fully documented. By the time the judge called the courtroom back to order, everyone understood that the trial had entered uncharted territory. The presence of a child witness, paired with Ranger's recognition, had created a scenario that demanded careful attention and thoughtful consideration. What had started as a routine home invasion case was now a complex interplay of instinct, memory, and human perception. And at the center of it all stood a 3-year-old girl, unaware of the enormity of her role but ready, in her own way, to speak a truth that adults could not ignore. The courtroom settled, a charged silence lingering over every desk, pew, and bench. Every adult present felt the tension, the anticipation, and the unspoken awareness that what came next would be extraordinary. The case that had seemed straightforward was now infused with mystery, revelation, and a deeply human connection between child and dog, a connection that might finally shed light on the hidden truths of that fateful night. And as the first hints of testimony began to take shape, everyone waited, collectively holding their breath, for the story to unfold in a way no one had anticipated, guided by the smallest voice and the most loyal companion. Ranger's eyes never left the child. The girl's hand trembled slightly in her aunt's grip. And the courtroom, aware but unsure, leaned forward, ready to witness a sequence of events that would challenge every assumption they had made about what it meant to observe, remember, and reveal the truth. The courtroom had settled into an unusual rhythm. Whispers and nervous glances had quieted, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to stretch across the wooden benches and polished floors. Every adult present was acutely aware that something extraordinary was unfolding, something that defied the ordinary cadence of justice. The little girl, perched on her Aunt Jennifer's lap, seemed calm, though her small fingers fidgeted nervously with the hem of her dress. Her wide eyes never left Ranger, the retired K-9 officer who had once protected her without recognition or reward. That night, though months had passed, remained vivid in her memory. The events of that fateful evening had burned themselves into her mind with remarkable clarity. She remembered the sirens, the flashing lights that had sliced through the darkness of the quiet neighborhood. She remembered officers running through the yard, their boots crunching broken glass underfoot. She remembered the sense of fear pressing against her chest, the way shadows moved in ways that seemed unpredictable and dangerous. And above all, she remembered Ranger. The dog had nudged her gently, guiding her behind a tree, pressing close to ensure she remained unseen by the man now sitting nervously in the courtroom. Her Aunt Jennifer had assumed the child's memories were vague, a hazy recollection of a frightening night. Most 3-year-olds cannot process complex events or recall specific sequences, but this child was different. Her observations were precise, detailed, and rooted in the instinctive clarity that sometimes accompanies trauma. She remembered the exact shape of the shadows, the direction of the suspect's movements, even the precise moment Ranger had diverted from his path to ensure her safety. To her, it was a story told with absolute certainty, an unfolding scene she had lived in real time, not an abstraction filtered through imagination. The judge, observing from the bench, felt the weight of anticipation pressing into every corner of the room. Judge Allen had presided over countless trials, seen a vast array of witnesses and testimony, yet he sensed that this trial had taken an unusual turn. Here was a 3-year-old whose recollection had the potential to challenge, corroborate, and even redefine the established narrative of the home invasion. The courtroom was now a stage where innocence, memory, and instinct intersected. Adults watched closely, not entirely understanding what they were witnessing, but acutely aware of its importance. Officer Reynolds leaned slightly toward the prosecutor, whispering quietly. "The girl's memory is exact," he said. "Ranger responded the way he did that night for a reason. He knew she was there. She saw everything." Morales nodded, eyes scanning the courtroom. She knew this witness was unprecedented. The combination of the child's memory and Ranger's reaction could provide the jury with a level of clarity no adult witness had achieved. Every piece of evidence could now be connected through her recollection, offering a human lens to the dog's documented behavior. Grayson, the defendant, shifted uneasily in his seat. His eyes darted from the child to Ranger, and then to his attorney, Daniel Harris. Harris whispered reassurances, though he himself was visibly troubled. The child's testimony, even if indirect at this stage, posed a threat. She remembered details that could undermine alibis, correct misinterpretations, and confirm behaviors recorded on bodycam footage. In a case where procedural evidence had been sufficient, the clarity provided by a 3-year-old and a dog could tip the scales decisively. The little girl's focus never wavered. She felt a quiet sense of duty, a child's innate understanding that something important rested in her memory. She remembered the suspect's jacket, dark and loose, the way he stumbled across the backyard, the objects he brushed past and dropped unknowingly. She remembered Ranger's precise movements, how he briefly left the main pursuit path to ensure she remained hidden, pressing against the tree and nudging her to remain still. Every detail she recalled was rooted in her lived experience, not imagination or suggestion. Jennifer watched her niece with awe and concern. She whispered softly, trying to soothe the child while also allowing her to express what she remembered. The girl, though young, seemed to understand that the adults were anxious, yet she did not waver. Her memory was unshakable. She could recall the suspect's exact route, the timing of each movement, and the subtle interventions Ranger had made to protect her. This was a child who, in a moment of crisis months ago, had observed with clarity that even seasoned officers had missed. The courtroom's energy shifted subtly as the first fragments of her memory were acknowledged. Jurors leaned forward, captivated by the idea that such a small witness could hold so much significance. Reporters scribbled notes, struggling to convey the gravity of the unfolding scene in mere words. The defendant's composure faltered, his hands tightening around the edges of his chair. Attorneys recalculated strategy in real time, considering how to integrate the child's observations without violating procedural rules or overwhelming the court with emotion. Morales, the prosecutor, carefully began to frame questions and evidence that could allow the child's memory to become part of the official record. She coordinated with Officer Reynolds to reference Ranger's behavior and body cam footage in a way that validated the child's observations. The goal was not only to corroborate the timeline of the crime, but also to demonstrate the reliability of her memory, rooted in direct experience. The combination of instinct, canine training, and human memory created a rare and compelling bridge to the truth. Even the judge recognized the delicate balance. This was not a moment for theatrics or overstatement. The courtroom required careful navigation to ensure that the child's memory could be acknowledged and verified without exploitation. Judge Allen's measured presence provided the necessary authority, his gavel a reminder that, while extraordinary events were unfolding, the rule of law still guided proceedings. Every adult present felt the tension, a mix of awe and responsibility, understanding that the testimony of the smallest witness could redefine expectations of credibility. Ranger, meanwhile, remained a silent sentinel. His body language conveyed recognition and calm assurance. The subtle flick of his tail, the alertness in his eyes, and the occasional tilt of his head all communicated acknowledgement of the child's memory. He had been trained to follow commands and respond to cues, but his instincts extended beyond obedience. He remembered the night vividly, remembered the child, and now seemed to validate the truth she carried. The courtroom, though unaware of the depth of his awareness, absorbed the energy and responded unconsciously to the bond unfolding before them. As proceedings prepared to resume, the adults in the room understood that this case had entered a new phase. The presence of the toddler, combined with Ranger's recognition and the corroborating evidence, created a scenario unlike anything the court had encountered. What had begun as a straightforward home invasion trial had evolved into a layered investigation, intertwining memory, instinct, and documentation in a narrative that demanded careful attention. Every observer felt the weight of history, aware that they were witnessing an intersection of innocence and justice rarely seen in legal proceedings. The child's recollections, though simple in delivery, held profound implications. Her memory mapped out a sequence of events, revealed hidden truths, and directly linked to Ranger's documented deviations during the pursuit. This allowed prosecutors to revisit key moments from the night, identify overlooked details, and integrate them into the formal presentation. The courtroom, previously confined to routine procedures and expected testimonies, now functioned as a stage for revelation. Every glance, gesture, and whisper mattered, creating an atmosphere of heightened anticipation. Jennifer, the aunt, felt a mix of emotions: pride in her niece's courage, awe at her perceptiveness, and a quiet fear at the responsibility she was carrying. She whispered encouragement, reminding her that she could speak when needed, yet the child seemed to know instinctively how and when to contribute. Her voice, though soft, had already altered the trajectory of the trial. Adults recognized that the most reliable insights could come from unexpected sources, innocence combined with attentive observation. The judge cleared his throat and called the court back to order. As the gavel struck, signaling the continuation of proceedings, the room held its breath. The child's memory, now recognized as pivotal, had the potential to reshape understanding of the night, clarify ambiguities, and provide a human anchor to evidence previously interpreted only through technical means. The anticipation was palpable. Every adult, from attorneys to jurors to spectators, knew they were about to witness a revelation that could change the case's outcome forever. And so, as the courtroom settled and the first words of testimony began to surface, the child remained at the center of the unfolding drama. Her memory, vivid and unwavering, held the key to unraveling mysteries that adults had struggled to comprehend. Ranger's calm presence reinforced the truth she carried, silently validating her observations. In that moment, the smallest witness in the room had become the most powerful, her memory a catalyst for justice, and her recognition of the dog, the first step in revealing a truth that no one had anticipated. The courtroom had grown impossibly still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath as the little girl's gaze remained fixed on Ranger, the retired K-9 officer who had once protected her in the shadows of that chaotic night. Her tiny lips trembled slightly, but her expression was determined, clear, and unshakable. She had already memorized the sequence of events, replayed every detail, and knew precisely what she wanted to convey. Then, in a voice soft yet unnervingly clear, she whispered two words, "Good helper." The effect was instantaneous. The judge froze mid-sentence, gavel in hand. The jurors leaned forward instinctively, the motion barely perceptible but heavy with anticipation. The attorneys paused, their pens hovering over notes, eyes wide. Even Thomas Grayson, the defendant, stilled, a subtle flicker of fear crossing his previously composed expression. The whisper, though two words, resonated throughout the courtroom as though the child's voice had unlocked an invisible truth no one had seen coming. Officer Reynolds exchanged a glance with Morales, the prosecutor. His eyes widened with recognition and understanding. Ranger's behavior, previously recorded as a minor deviation in pursuit, now took on a new significance. The dog had been responding to a hidden, vulnerable presence, the child. Those two words confirmed what instincts and notes had suggested. Ranger had acted to protect her, altering the course of events in a manner no adult had fully appreciated until now. The jurors, sensing the shift in energy, began to comprehend the gravity of the moment. A 3-year-old had just identified the K-9 who had ensured her safety during the home invasion. Her words suggested an eyewitness, a witness whose memory had remained intact despite her age. They realized that the sequence of events, the suspect's movements, and the K-9's behavior were all interconnected in a way they had never anticipated. The courtroom's rhythm, once predictable, was now filled with suspense and the promise of revelation. Grayson's composure began to waver. He whispered to his attorney, Daniel Harris, clearly unsettled by the unexpected development. Harris, trained to remain calm under pressure, could not conceal the unease creeping into his own voice. The child's recognition, though simple in delivery, carried a weight that could undermine alibis and expose inconsistencies in his defense. Every adult present sensed the precariousness of the moment. The trial had pivoted from procedural certainty to a complex interplay of instinct, memory, and human perception. Morales, the prosecutor, seized the opportunity with careful precision. She whispered to Officer Reynolds, confirming details that had previously been documented but not emphasized: Ranger's deviation, the time stamps, and the body cam footage. She began strategizing how to integrate the child's recollection into the formal narrative without compromising the courtroom's decorum. Each subtle motion, each quietly prepared note, was designed to reinforce the connection between the child's memory and the K-9's protective actions. The child's voice, though soft, carried authenticity. It was impossible to doubt her recognition. Two words, "good helper," captured an entire night of fear, instinct, and protection in a manner no adult witness could replicate. Even the judge's composed demeanor betrayed a hint of awe. Judge Allen leaned forward, carefully weighing how to proceed, understanding that the small voice before him could reshape the trajectory of the trial. This was no ordinary testimony. It was a revelation that demanded careful, deliberate attention. Ranger remained poised, yet his subtle body language conveyed acknowledgement. The flick of a tail, the alertness of his ears, the slight lift of his head, each motion confirmed the child's memory. To anyone trained to read canine behavior, Ranger's calm and attentive posture was an unspoken validation of her recognition. Adults in the courtroom, many unfamiliar with the nuances of animal communication, still sensed the gravity through the dog's deliberate composure. Something extraordinary had occurred. A child and a dog had collaborated unknowingly to reveal a truth hidden from the adult's eyes. Jennifer the aunt watched her niece with a mixture of pride, awe, and anxiety. She whispered softly, attempting to soothe the child while allowing her to remain confident. The girl understood the significance of what she had done without fully grasping the adult implications. Her memory had guided her, her courage had propelled her forward, and her words had halted an entire courtroom. To her, it was instinct. To the adults, it was remarkable, almost unbelievable. As the judge called for a brief recess to reorganize, Morales and Reynolds reviewed the archived bodycam footage once more. They paused on frames showing Ranger breaking formation, veering toward the tree where the child had been hidden. Every subtle motion, every cautious step, now aligned perfectly with the child's recollection. It became clear that her memory was accurate, precise, and undeniable. What had once been a minor anomaly in procedural notes had transformed into critical corroborating evidence, connecting instinct, documentation, and lived experience. The jurors returned to their seats, leaning forward in collective anticipation. The defense attempted to redirect focus, questioning minor procedural points, but even their efforts faltered under the weight of the child's recognition. She had already spoken, her words lingering in the minds of everyone present. Two simple words had shifted attention, forced reconsideration, and introduced a level of clarity no adult witness had achieved. The trial's narrative, once straightforward, now bristled with complexity and revelation. Outside the courtroom, the events of that night became illuminated in a new light. The neighborhood had long discussed the incident, but none had considered that a 3-year-old child had observed, remembered, and later articulated the sequence of events in a manner that could influence legal proceedings. Her perspective, innocent and unfiltered, became central. She bridged the gap between technical evidence and lived experience, demonstrating that even the smallest observers can hold profound insights into events others deem peripheral or insignificant. As the trial reconvened, the courtroom remained tense. Every movement, every glance, and every gesture carried weight. The child's recognition had established a new dynamic, one where memory, instinct, and human observation intersected. Adults realized that the ordinary rules of evidence were now complemented by extraordinary insight, a combination that could guide the jury toward a more complete understanding of the events. The energy was palpable, charged with anticipation and the potential for revelation. Grayson's anxiety was visible now. He fidgeted in his seat, shifting nervously. Harris leaned close, murmuring reassurances, but the cracks in their composure were apparent. The child had unwittingly become a pivot point in the trial, and her memory posed a direct challenge to the defense's narrative. Every adult sensed that the events of that night, previously hidden or overlooked, were about to surface in ways that could dramatically alter the trajectory of justice. Morales carefully structured the next phase of testimony. Officer Reynolds would recount Ranger's behavior with precise timing, while the child's recognition could be subtly integrated to corroborate key movements and actions. The goal was to present the evidence logically, avoiding manipulation or overstatement, allowing the clarity of memory and instinct to speak for itself. Every detail mattered. The exact position of the child, the timing of Ranger's deviation, the subtle cues captured in the body cam footage. Together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Ranger remained calm but attentive. His body language continued to signal recognition and validation. He understood the significance of the child's acknowledgement. Even though he could not articulate it in human terms, his instinctive response communicated a truth that words alone could not convey. The subtle connection between dog and child became the unspoken core of the courtroom, guiding perceptions and reinforcing the authenticity of her memory. Jennifer whispered softly to her niece, encouraging but unobtrusive. The child's small hand rested lightly on her aunt's arm, steady and confident. She understood that her memory mattered, that her words could guide the adults toward understanding, even if she did not yet grasp the legal implications. Her clarity and courage became a quiet force in the courtroom, a lens through which the events of that night were now filtered and revealed. By the time proceedings resumed, the courtroom was fully aware that the trial had entered an extraordinary phase. The child's recognition of Ranger had introduced a witness whose reliability and memory could not be questioned. 2 words had altered the dynamic, creating a ripple that demanded careful consideration, both legally and humanly. Adults realized that the smallest voice had just spoken the loudest truth, and that this truth would guide the next stages of the trial in unexpected and profound ways. The energy was thick with anticipation, as Morales prepared to integrate the child's recognition into the formal proceedings. Every adult in the room understood that the ordinary rules of procedure now coexisted with the extraordinary clarity of instinct and memory. What had started as a routine home invasion trial had evolved into a demonstration of how perception, courage, and connection could illuminate hidden truths. And at the center of it all stood a 3-year-old girl, unassuming yet pivotal, whose whisper had stopped a courtroom cold. The courtroom had fallen into a tense, almost reverent silence. Every adult present understood that the focus had shifted to the most unexpected participant in the trial, a 3-year-old girl whose memory held the potential to illuminate events no adult had fully seen. She sat on her Aunt Jennifer's lap, small and unassuming, her wide eyes fixed on Ranger. The retired K-9 officer's calm, attentive presence reinforced the significance of the moment. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and everyone in the room sensed it, though no one could predict precisely how the child's recollection would impact the case. Officer Reynolds stood quietly, nodding Ranger's subtle body language, the tail flicks, ear twitches, and watchful gaze. To the untrained eye, the dog seemed calm and composed, but to those who understood K-9 behavior, every movement conveyed recognition, validation, and the silent confirmation of truth. Ranger remembered the night of the break-in in vivid detail, each sound, each movement, and each instinctive decision imprinted in his memory. Now, months later, his recognition of the child connected past events to the present moment in a way that could not be fabricated or dismissed. The defendant, Thomas Grayson, shifted uneasily in his seat. His composure, which had seemed steady during procedural testimony, began to falter. He whispered to his defense attorney, Daniel Harris, seeking guidance, though it was clear even Harris struggled to maintain calm. The child's recognition of Ranger, her vivid memory of the night, and the implicit link between them threatened to undermine the carefully constructed defense narrative. Every adult in the room could sense the gravity. The trial was entering a stage that relied on instinct, memory, and subtle observation, rather than solely on conventional evidence. Morales, the prosecutor, recognized the opportunity. She conferred quietly with Officer Reynolds, reviewing the sequence of events captured on body cam footage and the K-9's reports. What had once been minor anomalies, Ranger's brief deviation from pursuit, the unusual pause in his path, now assumed critical importance. These actions, when combined with the child's recognition, created a coherent and compelling narrative. A hidden witness, observed and protected by Ranger, had retained precise memory of the suspect's movements. The small girl could now confirm the timeline of the crime in a way No adult had been able to. Judge Allen presided with characteristic composure, yet his attention was keen. He recognized the delicate balance required to allow the child's recollections to inform the trial without exposing her to undue stress or compromising the courtroom's order. He leaned slightly forward, listening attentively to every subtle cue from both the attorneys and the participants. The energy in the courtroom was electric, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath in anticipation of the child's contribution. Jennifer, the aunt, whispered gently to her niece, reassuring her while giving her the confidence to share her memory if asked. The child's small hand rested lightly on her aunt's arm, steady and poised despite the tension around her. Her gaze remained fixed on Ranger, as if drawing courage from the familiar presence. Months of remembering the events of that night had prepared her, in a child's instinctive way, for the moment when she could speak, or at least indicate, the truth. The jurors leaned forward, captivated. Most had expected a routine trial, procedural evidence, testimony from adults, and perhaps some technical documentation from officers and K-9 reports. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. A child's memory, intertwined with the behavior of a trained dog, providing clarity and insight that adults alone could not produce. The room seemed to recognize the importance of the moment collectively, a silent understanding settling over every observer. The defense attempted to regain control, questioning minor procedural points, but the child's recognition had already shifted the momentum. Her memory, rooted in first-hand experience and validated by Ranger's behavior, presented a challenge that no adult testimony could easily overcome. Harris whispered instructions to Grayson, urging calm, yet both men felt the pressure intensify. The trial had transformed into an intricate interplay of observation, memory, and instinct, forces that could not be coached, manipulated, or ignored. Morales carefully began integrating the child's recognition into the formal narrative. Officer Reynolds would recount Ranger's movements and the specific deviation that had ensured the child's safety. The bodycam footage would highlight the K-9's precise actions, and the child's reaction, her pointed recognition and subtle vocal acknowledgement, would corroborate the sequence of events. Every detail mattered. The positioning of objects, the timing of Ranger's deviations, and the child's observations, all forming a cohesive story that tied together previously disparate pieces of evidence. The courtroom seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Even minor sounds, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of whispered instructions, the soft breathing of spectators, took on amplified significance. Every adult present recognized that the ordinary rules of testimony were now complemented by the extraordinary insight of a 3-year-old witness. Her recognition of Ranger had already altered perceptions, forced reconsideration of the timeline, and introduced clarity that had been missing from previous proceedings. Ranger, calm but vigilant, continued to signal subtle acknowledgement. The flick of a tail, the careful observation of the child's movements, and the precise posture he maintained all communicated understanding and validation. Adults, whether trained in animal behavior or not, sensed the importance of his attention. It was as though the dog and child shared an unspoken understanding, a private narrative that connected the events of the past to the unfolding trial. This silent communication added weight to the child's recognition, emphasizing the authenticity of her memory. Jennifer whispered reassurance, and the child seemed to respond, relaxing slightly while maintaining focus. The small hand rested lightly on her aunt's arm, her fingers occasionally fidgeting, a sign of nervous energy rather than uncertainty. The child had lived through chaos, observed events with remarkable clarity, and now held the power to articulate or at least indicate crucial details. Every adult in the courtroom sensed the magnitude of what was about to unfold, aware that the smallest participant had become the most pivotal witness. The judge called the court to attention, signaling the next phase of testimony. Morales guided Officer Reynolds to the front, and he began recounting Ranger's actions that night with meticulous detail. The deviation from pursuit, the careful movement toward the hidden child, and the precise timing were all outlined. The jurors listened intently, realizing that every subtle motion, once considered minor, was now central to understanding the sequence of events. As the account unfolded, the child's expression shifted subtly. She leaned forward slightly, recognizing each detail as it was described. Her memory, validated by the officer and the dog, had become a living thread connecting evidence and instinct. Adults, observing this interaction, realized that the trial's outcome might hinge on these connections. The recognition of the child, corroborated by Ranger's behavior, confirming events that had previously been uncertain or overlooked. Even Grayson, the defendant, could not escape the implications. His anxiety became more pronounced, the carefully maintained composure cracking as he realized the courtroom was no longer predictable. The child's memory and recognition, validated by Ranger's behavior and the body cam evidence, posed a direct threat to his defense. Every adult sensed that the trial had moved into uncharted territory, where instinct, memory, and perception intersected in ways impossible to fabricate or manipulate. Morales prepared to take the next step carefully, allowing the child to indicate recognition without pressure or suggestion. The goal was to maintain the integrity of the testimony while ensuring that the jury could observe the authenticity of the connection. Every detail mattered: the subtle acknowledgement of Ranger, the child's posture, and her responses to questions that prompted recollection without leading. The courtroom held its breath. The judge's gavel, now more symbolic than commanding, rested lightly in his hand as he observed the scene. Adults, jurors, and spectators alike were aware that they were witnessing an extraordinary intersection of courage, memory, and instinct. The trial, once expected to follow a straightforward path, had evolved into a nuanced exploration of truth, illuminated by the perceptiveness of a 3-year-old and the unwavering attention of a retired K-9 officer. And as the child prepared to provide her first observable indication of memory beyond the whispered words, everyone sensed the gravity of the moment. The trial's trajectory, once predictable, was now poised for revelation. Ranger's calm vigilance, the child's instinctive courage, and the adult's awareness of significance had converged to create a courtroom atmosphere charged with anticipation. Every observer understood that the truth, previously hidden in shadows, was about to emerge in a way no one could have predicted. The moment had arrived. The air in the courtroom was almost tangible, thick with anticipation. Every eye in the room was on the small child, seated on her Aunt Jennifer's lap, fingers clutching the edge of her dress. Ranger, the retired K-9 officer, remained poised beside his handler, eyes alert, ears flicked forward. The tiny witness, whose whispered 2 words had already halted the trial, now held the potential to reveal more than anyone had imagined. Her memory, vivid and precise, had been building toward this moment, and everyone knew it, even if no one could fully comprehend the significance of what she was about to do. The judge, Allen, cleared his throat, signaling for the courtroom to hold its silence. He looked down at the child with measured patience, aware that she was about to contribute something unprecedented to the proceedings. Lawyers adjusted their positions, some leaning forward to catch every nuance of the unfolding drama. Even the gallery seemed to hold its collective breath. The quiet was nearly oppressive, a tension so thick that even the shuffling of papers sounded amplified. The trial, once ordinary, had transformed into a suspenseful theater, where truth could only be revealed through the smallest witness. Morales, the prosecutor, nodded subtly to Officer Reynolds. He began recounting Ranger's actions in precise detail, revisiting the archived bodycam footage, the deviations from pursuit, and the protective maneuvers executed that night. Each subtle movement, each slight deviation, was now of extraordinary significance, reinforced by the child's recognition. She had witnessed the suspect's movements, remembered the exact sequences, and silently validated every action Ranger had taken to ensure her safety. The child shifted slightly, her gaze flicking from Ranger to the officer recounting the night's events. Her wide eyes reflected both concentration and the clarity of memory that few adults could match. Jennifer whispered softly, reassuring her, but the child's focus remained intense. She had seen everything, remembered everything, and instinctively knew the importance of what she was about to indicate. Her presence was a silent command for the courtroom to recognize her perspective, a perspective that, until now, had been invisible. Grayson, the defendant, shifted uneasily in his seat. His fingers gripped the arms of his chair. His composure, so meticulously maintained throughout the trial, now threatened to unravel. Harris leaned close, offering quiet advice, but even he recognized the magnitude of the moment. The child's memory, coupled with Ranger's recognition, posed a threat impossible to fabricate, influence, or manipulate. The trajectory of the trial was no longer in the hands of attorneys or legal precedent. It rested on instinct, memory, and the quiet courage of a 3-year-old girl. The jurors watched, leaning forward, captivated. They had expected a straightforward sequence of testimony, procedural evidence, and adult witnesses. Instead, they were witnessing an extraordinary phenomenon, a child's recollection, validated by a K-9 officer, providing clarity that adults alone could not convey. The energy in the room was palpable. Every movement, every glance between the child and Ranger seemed to carry meaning. Adults instinctively understood that what was about to be revealed would shift their perception of truth. Jennifer whispered encouragement, her hand resting lightly on the child's arm. The little girl, small but determined, extended a finger and pointed subtly toward Ranger. A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. Adults could hardly believe what they were seeing. The child, in her own measured way, had confirmed that the dog she had trusted months ago was the same one present in the courtroom. That simple act of recognition, combined with her previous whispered words, halted proceedings as everyone processed the depth of the revelation. The judge's gavel hovered in midair, temporarily suspended as the realization spread. Ranger, calm yet alert, acknowledged the child with a subtle tilt of his head. His tail flicked lightly. The dog had remembered the night with remarkable precision. He had known instinctively where the child had been hiding and had protected her from harm. Now, in the quiet courtroom, that memory was being validated in real time. The combination of instinct, memory, and human observation was creating a narrative no one could dispute. Morales carefully structured the next steps. She guided Officer Reynolds to provide additional context without overwhelming the child or the court. Every movement, every subtle gesture reinforced the child's recognition. The body cam footage was displayed once more, highlighting Ranger's deviation and the path of the suspect. The child's gestures, pointing and indicating, matched the recorded movements with startling accuracy. Every adult present realized the implications. Her memory could confirm the timeline, corroborate evidence, and provide a perspective previously invisible to investigators and the jury. The gallery was silent, spectators holding their breath. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, struggling to convey the extraordinary scene in words. The defendant's face was pale, anxiety written in every twitch and shift. His attorney whispered quietly, attempting to manage both client and courtroom, but the weight of the child's recognition pressed against them with undeniable force. The smallest witness had become the most powerful, holding the key to understanding the events of that night with precision and clarity. Ranger remained a silent sentinel, validating the child's memory without need for words. His posture, movements, and calm demeanor communicated understanding and recognition. Adults, aware of the significance, could sense the unspoken narrative unfolding. The child had observed, remembered, and now was revealing the truth in a manner that combined innocence, instinct, and courage. Every gesture carried meaning, every glance was laden with confirmation, and every subtle action reinforced the credibility of her memory. Jennifer whispered softly, guiding the child without pressure. The little girl's confidence grew with each subtle interaction. She understood instinctively that her memory mattered, that her recognition could illuminate the truth, and that the adults around her were relying on her perception. Months of observation, fear, and instinct had prepared her for this moment, and she responded with quiet, unwavering clarity. The jurors leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding scene. They understood that procedural evidence alone was no longer sufficient. The child's recognition, validated by Ranger's behavior and the detailed officer testimony, provided a new dimension of truth. The courtroom was no longer just a place of testimony and documentation. It had become a stage for revelation, where instinct, memory, and perception intersected to illuminate a hidden narrative. The judge, maintaining composure, allowed the child's recognition to be fully observed and acknowledged. Every adult in the room felt the tension, the anticipation, and the quiet awe of witnessing something extraordinary. 2 words whispered months ago had paused the trial. Now, a subtle gesture confirmed the connection, halting the proceedings in disbelief. Adults exchanged glances, understanding that the smallest witness had spoken the loudest truth. The defendant, Thomas Grayson, shifted again, unease clear on his face. His meticulously crafted defense was under threat. He whispered to his attorney, whose own composure was strained. The child's memory, combined with Ranger's recognition and corroborated by recorded evidence, posed an unanticipated challenge. The ordinary rules of evidence and testimony had intersected with instinct and memory, creating a situation that could not be dismissed or denied. Morales prepared for the next phase, careful to balance observation with formal procedure. Officer Reynolds highlighted key movements and deviations, correlating them with the child's subtle indications. The sequence of events unfolded with precision. The hidden child, the suspect's route, and Ranger's protective maneuvers, all documented and now corroborated in real time. Every adult in the room recognized the profound significance. The trial, once ordinary, had evolved into a careful orchestration of memory, instinct, and revelation. The courtroom, collectively holding its breath, understood that truth had emerged in an unexpected form. A child's memory, coupled with a K-9 officer's instinct, had illuminated hidden details of the night. The jury, spectators, attorneys, and even the judge realized that the narrative had shifted irrevocably. The smallest voice, the quietest observer, had just altered the trajectory of justice in ways no one had predicted. And as the child prepared to provide the next subtle gesture of recognition, every adult in the courtroom leaned forward, aware that the final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place. The stage was set for the trial's climax. The intersection of memory, instinct, and courage had created a moment of revelation so profound that disbelief, awe, and anticipation filled every corner of the room. The smallest witness, silent yet powerful, was about to guide the course of justice in a way no one could have foreseen. The courtroom seemed suspended in time. Every eye remained locked on the 3-year-old girl perched on her aunt's lap. Her wide eyes glimmered with understanding, her small hand trembling slightly as it hovered above the wooden bench. She had already whispered the 2 words, "Good helper," and pointed subtly at Ranger, the retired K-9 officer whose calm, alert posture conveyed acknowledgement and recognition. The adults present could sense that something extraordinary was about to happen, something that could not be rehearsed, coached, or manipulated. Judge Allen leaned forward, his gavel resting lightly in his hand. The tension in the room was palpable. Attorneys, jurors, officers, and spectators were united in silent anticipation. Every subtle movement of the child, every gesture, every glance between her and Ranger carried weight. The courtroom understood that they were witnessing an unprecedented intersection of instinct, memory, and human perception. The small girl, previously underestimated because of her age, had become the most pivotal witness in the trial. Officer Reynolds took a careful step forward, motioning Ranger slightly closer while maintaining a respectful distance. He whispered quietly to the child, reinforcing her courage, but the girl's focus remained unbroken. She had replayed the events of that night countless times in her memory. The sirens cutting through darkness, the suspect darting across the yard, the crunch of broken glass, the shadows that twisted in the moonlight. Above all, she remembered Ranger's protective nudges, the guidance that had kept her hidden and safe. Morales, the prosecutor, motioned toward the child. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Can you show us who helped you that night?" she asked, careful not to pressure the child but allowing her to indicate recognition. The girl's small hand rose, pointing decisively toward Ranger. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jurors leaned forward in unison, captivated. Even the gallery of spectators sat frozen, recognizing that the child's gesture carried an authenticity that no words could rival. Grayson, the defendant, slumped slightly in his seat. His earlier composure had eroded. Daniel Harris whispered reassurances, but the cracks in his client's demeanor were evident. The child's recognition, paired with Ranger's instinctive validation, presented a truth that no adult testimony could refute. This was not conjecture or speculation. It was a living, breathing confirmation of events from that night, delivered in a way that was undeniable. The judge allowed a pause. He understood the delicacy of the moment. The court needed to absorb the significance of what had just occurred. Every adult present felt a weight in the room, the realization that the smallest witness had just altered the trajectory of the trial. 2 words whispered months ago had stopped proceedings. A subtle gesture now reinforced that truth, bridging memory, instinct, and documented evidence. The narrative had shifted irrevocably. Officer Reynolds elaborated on Ranger's movements, correlating them with the body cam footage. Every subtle deviation, every moment of hesitation, now took on new meaning. Ranger had paused, diverted from the pursuit, and ensured the child's safety without hesitation. The child's recognition confirmed the precise sequence, adding a human dimension to the K-9's instinctive actions. Adults in the courtroom absorbed the gravity. The night's events, once fragmented and partially documented, were now coherent, corroborated, and validated by memory and behavior combined. The jury, leaning forward, understood the extraordinary significance. They were witnessing an unfiltered truth, delivered through a small child and a retired K-9 officer. No procedural technicality, no human bias, could diminish the clarity of what had been revealed. 2 witnesses, one human, one K-9, had illuminated the night's events in a way that no adult alone could have. The trial had moved beyond ordinary testimony into the realm of revelation. Jennifer whispered softly to her niece, reinforcing the child's confidence. The girl's hand remained steady, fingers pointing subtly but decisively. She understood in a childlike way that her memory was powerful, that her recognition mattered, and that she had already contributed to the unfolding justice. Months of recollection, replayed in her mind countless times, culminated in this moment of clarity, where instinct and memory converged to reveal hidden truths. Ranger, calm but alert, signaled acknowledgement. The flick of his tail, the focused gaze, the slight tilt of his head, all communicated recognition. His behavior confirmed the child's memory, validating the sequence of events captured on body cam footage and noted in officer reports. Adults, even those unfamiliar with canine behavior, sensed the authenticity of this silent communication. The child and dog had created a bridge between observation and documentation that could not be ignored. Morales carefully outlined the implications to the jury, connecting the child's recognition with the documented deviations in Ranger's pursuit, the suspect's movements, and the timeline of events. Every step was validated by the child's memory, creating a comprehensive narrative that tied together evidence, instinct, and human observation. The courtroom's collective attention remained fixed, as the smallest witness had just provided the clearest testimony possible. Grayson's anxiety grew. He whispered to his attorney, visibly shaken. Harris, despite his efforts, could not mask the gravity of the situation. The child's recognition and Ranger's instinctive acknowledgement had undermined critical aspects of the defense's argument. What had once been procedural uncertainty was now illuminated with clarity. The trial's trajectory had shifted irreversibly, and the smallest witness had catalyzed this transformation. The gallery erupted in subtle murmurs, which the judge quickly quieted. Adults exchanged glances of disbelief and awe. The child's memory, though simple in its expression, had revealed complexities and connections that no other witness could have conveyed. Her recognition, combined with Ranger's instinctive validation, created an unassailable chain of events. The night, previously fragmented in reports and testimony, was now cohesive and vivid. The final pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. The child indicated, through subtle gestures, the exact path of the suspect, the positions of objects, and the sequence of Ranger's movements. Every detail matched recorded evidence, every indication confirmed previous documentation, and every gesture carried authenticity. The courtroom held its collective breath as the realization settled. A 3-year-old's memory had just redefined the understanding of a home invasion, corroborated by a K-9 officer whose instinct had ensured safety. The judge called for a final pause, allowing the gravity to sink in. Every adult present understood the enormity of what had just transpired. The trial had been transformed by memory, instinct, and courage, culminating in a moment that no legal precedent could have predicted. 2 whispered words and a subtle gesture had stopped the courtroom cold, compelling everyone to reconsider the events of the night with fresh eyes and renewed understanding. Jennifer hugged her niece gently, pride and relief evident in her expression. The child, still small and quiet, had changed the course of a trial through observation, memory, and courage. Her actions reminded every adult present that truth can emerge in unexpected forms, sometimes through the smallest voices and the most silent witnesses. Ranger remained vigilant, his calm demeanor a testament to his training, instinct, and loyalty. Together, child and dog had illuminated a narrative previously hidden in shadows. Morales summarized the sequence of events, tying the child's memory and Ranger's behavior to the timeline of the break-in. Every element of evidence now aligned: the suspect's movements, the protective actions of the K-9, and the child's precise recollection. The courtroom, once filled with procedural anticipation, now held a rare sense of resolution. Adults recognized that justice had been illuminated through an extraordinary combination of instinct, courage, and memory. Grayson slumped further, defeated. His meticulously constructed defense had crumbled under the weight of 2 silent, powerful witnesses, a child and a dog. Harris whispered quietly, but the inevitability of the outcome was clear. The courtroom, jurors, and spectators all sensed that the smallest witness had revealed the ultimate truth, halting proceedings in disbelief and awe. Judge Allen finally spoke, his voice steady but acknowledging the gravity. The court recognizes the significance of the child's testimony, her recognition, and the corroboration provided by Officer Reynolds and Ranger. This is a pivotal moment in understanding the events of that night. He paused, letting the words settle. Every adult present understood that the trial had reached a point where the extraordinary had become undeniable, and justice would now be guided by observation, memory, and courage, beyond conventional expectations. And in that moment, as the courtroom absorbed the revelation, the 3-year-old girl quietly rested her small hand on her aunt's arm. Her eyes still flicked toward Ranger, the loyal K-9 whose instincts had protected her and validated her memory. 2 words and a subtle gesture had stopped the trial cold, changed the trajectory of justice, and reminded every adult present that truth can emerge from the most unexpected places. The trial, once routine, had become extraordinary, guided by the smallest witness with the clearest memory and the most loyal helper at her side.